our topic of interest, and we're happy to have Mr. Welton with us again. When I put Gozoutas to Gozintas, we've talked about transmitters, we've talked about antennas, and the question is, what's the best way to get the RF from the transmitter to the antenna, and what are some of the traps that get in the way of doing that? And one that I immediately mentioned to Jeff was the difference between the UHF and N connectors that are found on the back of some transmitters. Most of us that dealt with Marty's and Mosley's remember that from the 80s. But there's still some transmitters because you can't quite get 1 5/8 or 3 1/2 on the back of the VS1000, can you, Jeff?
You probably could, but I'm not sure you'd want to. And we'll get into that a little too, because I've got some photos and different things. If you enable screen sharing.
Okay.
And it's good that you brought up the PL259s, the UHF connectors versus N, because that's something that is just so easy to confuse. I mean, if you look at them, they're pretty darn similar from a physical glance. Oh, this is the part where I ask the mandatory, did my screen share?
Yes, it's shared.
Oh, yay. Now I've got to change the, this is, I always have to do this with Zoom, is figure out how to look at who else here as well. Not enough brain cells and too many things to do. But anyway, so yeah, it's a really big deal. I mean, of course, for broadcast, we mostly use N connectors, but there is still some stuff out there like the Marty's that uses the PL259s. So how do you tell the difference? I mean, and I'll be the first to confess, I don't know the difference off the top of my head because I've only ever dealt with N connectors. So this is where I rely on the people in the audience. And I noticed Dave Klein's comment too. It's like, I want to know what the review of David Stewart's salad is too, because that looks pretty tasty.
Okay, as long as we're deviating here, I want to welcome a couple of folks that are on the YouTube live stream and mention that we don't hear you and we don't see you, but there's a chat box on the side, and you're welcome to ask questions of Jeff or anyone else.
Cool. No, Mark Forrest is doing McDonald's. I'm not even going into that. But so anybody wants to unmute and tell me, I mean, obviously you've got the little ridges on the UHF connector versus the flat top on the N connector. What else? I mean, they don't physically fit, do they?
If I'm no, the N connector has a, actually, let's go the other way. The PL259 is just a single pin in the middle. Right. The N connector is a much smaller pin and then sort of a coaxial thing. Look at the end of the connector. It's really obvious.
Cool. And I mean, of course, I just grabbed the side picture of these two just to show that they do from a quick glance look something similar. And the other cool thing, and I've ran into this a lot, and this guy did a little a study, a little ham test, and that's where I stole this picture from, but just comparing the performance of the two, and they're pretty similar. And you hear a lot of this is better, that is better, but you know, I think it's more what's convenient for you. Oh, Barry's got, there we go. There's the end picture, end picture. So yeah, you don't have the little coaxial sleeve and you've got a bigger pin on the UHF connector. But that's one thing I've run into a lot. 75 ohm versus 50 ohm cable is another big deal, especially at these lower power levels.
And Jeff, there's also a 75 ohm end connector and a 50 ohm end connector, and the center pins are notably different.
Mm-hmm. So it's really critical that you do pay attention, because a lot of times over the years, you know, if you've got a parts box kicking it out at the transmitter site or in the studio, the stuff that got shoved in there may or may not be what you think it is. So sometimes you can, I've seen situations where somebody tried to plug the wrong connector into the wrong socket, and ugly things happen. If you, what do they say? If it don't fit, force it. If it breaks, it needed fixing anyway. But that's just something to pay a lot of attention to. On the coaxial impedance, 75 ohm in connector should be banned. Well, it would be nice to have a stand. Well, the great thing about standards is that there are so many of them. You know, so yeah, it should be consistent, but it's not. Now, having said that, again, coming back to the coax impedance, I've run into cases where using BNC cable, I'll use a 75 ohm cable instead of a 50 ohm. And if you've got a good source to load match, then that's less critical. But if you get any imbalance between the two or any mismatch, it's going to be magnified a lot if the character impedance of your cable is different. And again, there's lots of people in the audience that know more about this stuff than I do. So, you know, feel free to unmute and jump in.
There is actually a 50 ohm and a 75 ohm BNC connector as well.
Yep. Yep. And so as I understand it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 75 ohm is primarily used for video, the 50 ohm primarily for data and audio. And the 50 was chosen because the ideal characteristic impedance was somewhere around 33 ohms originally calculated. Is that about right? Gordon's got his perplexed face. Maybe that was something new that I picked up on I saw it on the internet, so it must be true.
The story that I heard goes back to the early days when they were playing with pipe, copper pipe for transmission line, and standard diameters of copper pipe worked out to a 51.5 ohm,
Mm-hmm.
which is only a spitting distance from 50 ohms.
Yep, yep, just
Well,
a hair away.
Well, on data coax, back from the ArcNet days, that was 62 ohms. A lot of that.
So just to confuse the issue even further, but definitely, again, it's really, and it'll work in a pinch, any port in a storm, but it's really a good idea. And you've heard me beat the drum on standardizing audio levels. Same concept with cable and connectors. It's a really good idea to, oh, look at that. Barry's got an article about it. So we've got a reference. But it's a really good idea to try and standardize right through the facility. I mean, it just cuts down on the potential issues. I'm not going to read that fast, Barry. I'm not even going to try.
No, it's mostly to let folks know that it's there.
So definitely, you know, that is a good article to use as a resource for that. One of the other things we run into a lot is people will, and I've got a couple of pictures on this too, but if you buy a new box, and I don't care whether you buy our box, well, I do care if you buy our box or somebody else's, because, you know, my paycheck depends on at least selling a few here and there. But when you buy a new box, don't just automatically assume that the Gozintas and Gozoutas are going to be in the same place. And I can't tell you how many calls we get, because our old full-size transmitter tube rig had the output connector at the top, and yours has got it on the back, and now we can't, we need, and you know, that was, let's see, I think I may have actually, yeah. So I had a situation where they gave me a yell, and they said, we need an elbow, and we need it right now. And in that case, they hadn't quite ordered the transmitter yet, and this was cool. They thought about it before it was delivered, because instead of providing the transmitter with an EIA output to match the EIA flange they had, which was pointed vertically, we got them a DIN output on the transmitter, used a DIN elbow and superflex cable to make a jumper to get up to their existing EIA flange. The benefit to that is, number one, the DIN connectors are almost half the price. And at the 2.5 kilowatt level, there's another thing too, though. Check the rating for what you're doing. Have you ever tried to run 5 kilowatts through a DIN connector? They're supposed to be able to handle it. Chris is sitting there going, no, don't do that. Yeah, the DIN connector at 100 megahertz, depending again on the connector and the cable, they say it will handle 5 kilowatts. I've never tried it with more
I
than
have.
2,800. Okay, how'd it go?
It worked.
Didn't
It
burn
worked
up?
fine.
Didn't
No,
get warm?
never even got warm. I was surprised.
Cool. So that's a good thing to know. And we have started using DINs a lot more for everything we do. You know, now we'll give you a choice, DIN versus EIA, but the DIN is something that you can slap on with a hand by hand if you need to, or with a regular multi-tool if you want to. And they're easier to connect, disconnect. The connectors are typically less expensive. They're just a whole lot more convenient than EIA. And the other thing is that they will tend to add a lot less weight, like lateral weight, to the back of a transmitter if you're looking at a shelf mount transmitter or a rack mount transmitter. So something else to be aware of. And this is just a screenshot of the back of a VS2.5 here from the manual. So again, something else to be aware of is what connector you get that way. And I mean, even up to the big boxes, we got a call, and I don't know if I've got it here or not. No, I don't. I was going to grab a screenshot of an email where a customer in a panic needed a elbow for a 3 1/8 flange, because he didn't realize that we didn't provide an elbow with the transmitter. I mean, again, check these things. I don't know, bullets, center conductors is another one. We get, or interconductors, we get a lot of situations. We don't provide bullets, and we say that in the pre-install book, but we still get a lot of people surprised by that. So was it last month we did planning, Barry?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this was another one of those things that when you're figuring out what connectors you need. I was working with a project for a guy recently, and he goes, I need this transmitter, I need a 4-port switch, a 3-port patch bay, and a dummy load. And I said, cool. I said, do you want us to provide all the stuff to connect them together? Well, yeah. Okay, I kind of need to know how much line, whether you want hard line or coax, whether you want, you know, elbows required. Like, I need to know what your room is going to look like. He goes, oh, well, it's the room is 20 by 60. Okay, where's the parts going? Oh, well, I don't know. Yeah, again, it's hard to plan out that sort of thing. And 20 feet of a hard line is not free. So actually, these days, it's even less not free than it used to be. Who installs a transmitter and doesn't check the connector arrangement? About 1 out of every 20 customers that we speak to. That's who. Yeah, we get those calls a lot more, especially the lower power ones, because the low power gear is designed to be pretty much sort of like a home stereo. You buy it, you take it out of the box, you put it in a rack, you connect the RF, you connect the AC, you connect the audio, and you turn it on. Except it's not. It's still a transmitter. And yeah, you know, a lot of folks assume that the output connector will be in the same spot that their old transmitter was, and that's risky. And yeah, we do supply ferrites.
We can also talk from the audio standpoint as well. I find that a lot of stations order equipment and don't understand what the inputs and the outputs on the back of automation gear will be, or other things like that.
Not just automation. Like if you look at this transmitter picture right here, I mean, we've got the standard XLR for AES EBU, but if you're running analog audio, which is of course becoming less and less of a thing, then that's onto the DB9 connector, and that is something that catches people by surprise. And I mean, it's like I've said before, I'm not the guy that you're going to find sitting at a transmitter site soldering a DB9 if I can avoid it at all. I'll do it if I have to. I've got the gear. But as I get older, the hands aren't as steady as they used to be. And yeah, I'd much rather buy one of those little DB to Phoenix terminal breakouts and have a screw connection so I can do live adaptation, like if I have to change stuff. But yeah, absolutely. And Richard makes a good point. DIN's over 7/8 EIA, and we do the same on this 2.5. Those are your options, EIA or DIN, and I'd pick the DIN any day given a choice. Again, less weight on the transmitter. You can put a DIN elbow on and connect it to a 7/8 Superflex if you can find that anymore. There's still some around. And you take a whole pile of weight over putting a 7/8 connector with a 7/8 elbow and 1-inch line or whatever.
The next step that often needs to be discussed, I think, is once you get it out of the transmitter, if you're in a rack with a VS 1000 or 300, you don't have a lot of room to hang an EIA on the back, but you may need a 90-degree angle.
Yeah. Now I'll take it a step further. And again, up to the 2.5, because you can get 7/8 Superflex that will handle 2.5 kilowatts. I will typically suggest that you point the connector down and buy 3 feet more cable than you need, because then you can extend the transmitter on its slides without having to undo it. It gives you, you know, a little bit of a stress loop, or what do you call it? A pull. Anyway, it gives you a loop. And I'm seeing a couple of heads nodding, so I'm glad to know I'm not the only crazy person that doesn't mind buying 3 feet of cable when 1 feet will do. But yeah, it just makes life easier.
You always need a service loop.
Yep, service loop. That was what I was trying to look for. And you know, the same with the audio cables. I mean, it used to be a million years ago when we mounted our exciters inside the transmitter, we put the little swing arms with the cables tied onto them so it all could extend out and back. And you can still buy those for rack mounts. That might be a little over and above, but yeah, you put the service loop in, tie everything together neatly, and now you've got something so you can extend it if you've got to do something silly like replace a fan, rather than having to disconnect every wire from the back and get the transmitter out. I'm not sure about drip loop. And, so Gordon, I'm here to tell you that, again, probably the same 1 out of 20 customers, but I've seen more transmitters covered with tarps than I care to admit to as well. In my site security presentation, there's a picture of a transmitter building with the corrugated steel roof peeled back, and there's $100,000 worth of GV transmitter underneath it. So yeah, tarps are not uncommon, much less uncommon than they should be. So again, yeah, planning all this stuff out ahead of time is a whole lot easier. And this was the situation here. The owner came to me and said, hey, you know, engineer says we need to get from over here to up here. What do we need? And I said, she said, he says EIA cable. And I said, well, if we do this, we can put the DIN on, it'll save you some money, and it'll make it more flexible and easier. And so that's what we ended up doing. But again, the same deal on the big rigs. And we put a 30 kilowatt in about a month ago now. And, you know, last minute, we're looking at the list of parts that were ordered and saying, we need this and we need that. And some numbskull who looks a lot like me sent a starter flange instead of a field flange, you know, and if you're connecting hardline in the field, solder flanges are a pain in the butt. So yeah, Gordon's shaking his head. I'm sorry, it wasn't you anyway, Gordon, although it wasn't too far east of you. But but yeah, I mean, those are the sort of details that that are easy to overlook, and it always helps to have somebody second, or I guess double checking your own work, you know, because I've been doing this more than a few weeks, and yeah, I felt like a dummy. It's like, oh shit, you know, excuse my French, but yeah, that was the first thing I said was, whoops, wrong connector there. So quick call to Mayat, and B came through and got me a connector overnighted, and life was good. But But yeah, and shout out there. I don't know if we get anybody from competitive groups, but just a shout out to the folks at Myatt for pulling my tail end out of the fire on that one. I mean, it's really nice to be able to reach out to somebody on a Friday afternoon and have a part in place Monday morning when our guy arrives to start putting stuff together.
You raise a good issue too. Again, if you are going to bring the RF out of a transmitter, and very often before the antenna or the filters, you have a switch. And many years ago, I opened a box at a station here in town that was sent in by order from headquarters. And it was a replacement for a burned out switch, except there are two basic models, one with the ports on the side and one with the ports on the top or bottom, depending on how you mount it. And the tower guy came down, the rigger who was going to install this thing. He says, I can make this work, but you're going to have to buy a heck of a lot of little 90-degree guys and a couple of days of my time, or you can go ahead and replace it. And we had a parts supplier, and I was very amazed. I bought a lot more from him since. He just took it and replaced it, and that was how we got it done.
Yep. Beyond that, and this is kind of segueing from connectors, but it all comes back to the install. If you're putting in a switch, you've got the choice of 12 volt or 24 volt control line. And if you're replacing an existing one, you'd better know what voltage your controller is providing, or you could potentially, you got a 50-50 chance. And I don't know about everybody else, but when I've got a 50-50 chance, the odds are 100% that I'm going to get it wrong. So, you know, I mean, that's something else to pay attention to. But yeah, definitely the side mount versus top mount, especially if you're trying to work with an existing. If you're putting in brand new, it's not as much an issue. One of the other ones, and this comes back to that project where I was talking about, where the guy said, yeah, I need a 4-port switch and a 3-port patch bay. And it's like, well, okay, how do you want these configured? What do you want? What are we hoping to accomplish? Because that, again, depends on where you wire it, and may depend on what connectors and cables you need, or not cables so much as hardline, but yeah, having an idea of what your site layout is going to be, both mechanically and from a schematic perspective. You know, because if I was doing his facility, I'd probably have done it a little differently, because he's got main transmitter, alternate transmitter running into a 4-port switch, which should connect you to antenna or dummy load, except that the dummy load port goes to a 3-port patch bay, which then connects to antenna or second antenna or dummy load. So it's, you know, it's, I think, a little less elegant and streamlined than it could be. And so we're discussing that now, but it's, if you get me in early in the evolution, it's easier to develop what we want to have happen and send you a quote based on that, other than, you know, send you a quote based on what you ask for. And then it's like, yeah, you really don't need this, but you do need 3 of those. So, you know, it's definitely get your sales people or your engineering people involved early on in the overall layout, because you can save some really scary stuff that way. Oh, one other thing, when you're planning your output, you see that big grid work on the front, that's the exhaust air. And if the exhaust air has got ductwork going, you might want to be sure that you don't need to put a 90 right on the roof of the transmitter and run the hard line straight forward. Because I've walked into sites where there were holes cut in the ductwork with the hard line running right through them. And it's not the ideal situation. That's my subtle way of putting it. The words I used in person were a little less correct. So yeah, again, having an overall view, and you remember last week when we got talking about the guy trying to get the transmitter up the flight of stairs and forgetting that the floor or the stair climber added a foot of height. by the same token, you want to be sure that you've got a three-dimensional picture of your transmitter building. I mean, drawing the top-down view of this will go here, this will go here, this will go here is great, but you need a plan view too, where you're looking at it face on going, okay, this hard line needs to go up 3 feet so I can put the elbow up there to go over the ductwork.
A suggestion when you're doing your transmission line planning, plumbers use I'll call it a graph paper. It's essentially a 3D graph paper where it has diagonal lines as well as vertical lines. And they use that for visualizing plumbing situations in a house. And it works real good for doing transmission line stuff as well.
That'd be really cool. So I should be able to just Google 3D graph paper, right?
Yeah, or possibly something a plumber's graph paper. Let me take a quick look. I'll bet you I can find it quick.
Looks like isometric.
I think I got it
Very
at General
good.
Plumber. General Plumbing Supply used to carry it.
So,
Well, the
isometric
good plumbers
graph
that I knew always carried a tablet of that stuff.
Well, and I'm thinking that would be really handy because, you know, you can do your, a lot of times I'll do a sort of a 3D view of a facility. So, I mean, that way I can do up top, face on, and at an angle. So, no, that's a really good idea. Thanks, Gordon. Now, of course, I'll be trying to find some that I can print and just have a one of the printers beside me running for the next little while, and it'll make it into a. We'll put a Nautel logo on it, make Nautel notepads for some Nug if we ever get back to that at some point.
Okay, now we know what we're getting at NAB as swag.
Not this year. Now this year, like I said, we toned it down. Depending on what goes on, I mean, I just learned today that Louisiana canceled their convention for September. It was going to be the 8th and 9th, right on top of Madison. Knock on wood, the WBA is still planning to go, so you may see me there. And then last week, Sunday night, Alabama postponed their show to January, so I'm not taking any bets on actually being in Vegas in October, but I'm not taking any bets against it. We've got the hotel and the airfare booked.
Louisiana pushed theirs off this morning.
Yes, I just saw it till June. Michael just put a link in the chat for the isometric paper. So there you go. That's a great resource, and thanks for bringing that one up. Now, and again, we talked about the 50 ohm versus 75 ohm. And so I just hit Google, and apparently I am not the only person who's ever asked this question. But yeah, it's one of those, again, in a pinch, it'll work just fine, assuming that you've got the right connectors in place. But definitely over the long haul, and if you get any mismatch source to load, it can cause some issues. So it's not the ideal situation. I mean, it's the same as running AES audio over quad phone cable. You can do it, but just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, and you have to be real careful, especially when you're running from a composite from a processor to an exciter. But you want to make sure you have the 50 ohms, and some of those are even length critical. I found out with the Harris digits, in fact.
Right. And if you're running regular audio, I mean, we typically on the older transmitters, you had a physical switch. On the new ones, I think you're pretty much stuck with, I forget what it is. I think they're all 10K ohm now. And the reason for 10K was because we get a lot of people that just don't know what they've got for source impedance. I've seen 50, 600, and 10K at various times. So yeah, again, standardizing on something is much preferable to not, but it's really intriguing how some of this stuff works. See, I think that was all. I don't typically throw a lot of pictures up for this just because You know, you don't need, well, it's like I say, we all get slideshowed to absolute death, or I do anyway. Oh, good note about the power connector type, Yelp. Male versus female, or the, let's see, a common European style in Albuquerque. And I'll be the first guy to tell you that I apologize now, but 169 countries in the world do use the metric system. So you're not going to find a 7/16 bolt on our transmitters anywhere. It'll all be, you know, 11 millimeter or so ish, 12. But yeah, having the right connector type and making sure that you do have the right tools. And you know, like as an example with the power connections for our boxes, we use Allen keys. And again, we're Canadian, we use metric Allen keys. We do provide them with the transmitter because we found that those are one of the things. You can buy a set of metric wrenches at Ace Hardware. You're less likely to find a set of metric Allen keys. So those we do provide with the gear.
Harbor Freight has a real nice set of T-handle Allen keys for $7.
There you go.
That's
See, what
Harbor
we're-
Freight, but you know, it's still a tool.
Hey, well, I mean, they'll last you once or twice at least. And I mean, that's typically on an install, all you really need.
Gordon, we appreciate the plug for Harbor Freight. My son works there.
Well, they've gotten me out of a bind more than once. A few weeks ago, I needed a 3.5 millimeter tack for a screw.
Mm-hmm.
And Harbor Freight was the only place I could walk in and buy them. I bought a set. It was $20. I've got enough metric taps now to last me forever. But I got what I needed. I would have paid probably $7 or $8 at a hardware store if I could find it.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, you know, it's like 20 years ago. I mean, if I was in the field and found a blown resistor and didn't have a part, you'd think nothing about going to Radio Shack and grabbing a resistor and, you know, or one of the little bags of them to get her done. I mean, these days, those places are getting fewer and further between. I found one in Milwaukee. I forget what it's called now. And there are a few others scattered around who are still open and doing stuff. But yeah, it's not like you can just run out and grab components off the street anymore. Richard's got a good point. When you're ordering for a new install, add some extras. And I mean, we do the same when you buy our spares kit. Typically, the spares are based on two things. Number one, the chance of it failing. I mean, we don't typically put bolts or whatever in the spares kit, but you'll find fuses. And the second thing is based on how many there are in a transmitter. 40 kilowatt will have more power amplifier pellets in the spares kit than a 10 kilowatt will have, as an example. So yeah, it's always good to, if I need one, I order two, and that way the next time I need one, I've already got it. But the next time I need one, I'll probably order one or two anyway, just because. You know, you tend not to run out that way. Richard's nodding his head, and it's like, yeah, the first time you've been caught short with that, you know, you're doing an install on a mountaintop and you don't have that bullet, you'll order two the next time.
What percentage of clients do you find order the spare parts kit, and how many say, we'll just trust that the transmitter won't ever break?
Okay, so as the worst sales guy in the world, I suck at upselling, and when they ask me about the spares kit, I say 90% of those parts will still be on the shelf in 10 years. And again, this is something you can work with your sales rep for. I will typically break it out and say, order the site kit, which is a lot less, but includes a full set of fuses. Order a couple of fans, which we sell separate, and a couple of power supplies and a couple of amplifier pallets. You'll be good to go. I may suggest you order half a dozen hybrid combiner reject load resistors. So it varies one transmitter to the next. On a VS300, for example, which is a $4,000 or $5,000 transmitter, I'm not going to suggest you pay $800 for the spares kit as a rule. So what percentage buy the spares kit? In my neck of the woods, probably 10 or 20. There's a fair bit of them, actually. And John's got a good point. Buy one kit for multiple transmitters. You know, you don't need to buy a kit for each one, especially if they're reasonably close. Or you can, if you've got, like, I know in Denver, I mean, Chris has got several regional bunches. So you'll have a set of studios in Denver, another set in Detroit, another set in Chicago. Keep a kit at each studio. And then when the guy goes out to the transmitter site, you can grab the kit off the shelf and away it goes. So yeah, I mean, you don't need a spares kit per transmitter, I don't think. And a lot of that depends on how much commonality there is. So, you know, if you've got, like, and I'm obviously going to pick on us, but I'm sure it's true for Gates Air, BE, or anybody else. But if you've got one of our NV Lite transmitters, same power amplifiers and power supplies as the GV series use. The same amplifier palette as a VS2.5 uses. So you can really, you know, tend to be more proactive and customize your spares over just buying the stock spares kit. And don't know about every other sales guy, but I'd be happy to work with you on that stuff.
Anyone have any questions for Jeff at this point? I think one of the things that occurs, of course, is everyone thinks they can do an install on their own, but it always helps to ask questions either locally or somebody that you know from our meetings here that has done an install.
Not just that, but and that's huge. I mean, because the only thing you know going into an install is that there's a lot you don't know. I mean, and again, it could be one. Well, like I said, with this one there in Michigan, about a couple of weeks ago, where our tech gets there, or he's actually, I think he was doing a final check on the list of parts that we had sent, and said, "Hey, this says you sent a field flange or a solder flange." And say, "Oh crap, sorry, when you going to be there?" And yeah, just double check the paperwork. What do they say? Make a list and check it twice. Well, that's what I say. But it's really easy to overlook things. And if you've done it a lot, sometimes it's even easier to forget stuff than if you've never done it before. Because if you've never done it before, you're going to be looking at all the little details typically. But yeah, get a second set of eyes, because the odds are if I miss something the first time, I'll miss it the second time and the third time. I mean, that particular order, I looked up the part for the bid, I quote it. We got the PO. I look over the PO before I submit it for processing. Our processing lady, Jennifer, she'll send out the order confirmation. I look it all over then. 3 times I looked over and, of course, missed it every time. Familiarity breeds contempt, and sometimes children, well, I don't know about, you don't, if you're breeding children at a transmitter site, that's a whole different topic. We'll have to see if Barry will do another session on that. I'll tell the story about the mattress I found at the site in Ottawa one day, but
it's a whole study of propagation.
Yeah. I don't think we need to go down that road at this point. But
I'd like to make a suggestion here, and Jeff probably will come hunting for me after I say this. But if you're buying a Nautel, call the guy that you're looking at on your screen, because, yeah, Jeff, that's you. If he doesn't know, he'll find out.
And I'll be the first to admit there's a lot I don't know. The only thing I do know is the more I do this, the more I realize how much I do not know. But yeah, talk, and you can certainly call me. Doesn't matter my territory, any other territory. We all do work well with each other and back and forth. We put together a really good team, both in sales, service, and engineering. And you know, I mean, Chris will vouch for the fact occasionally you'll run into a log jam somewhere and give me a holler. Sometimes I can stir the pot a little bit. 30 odd years there, I've got enough job security. I'm not afraid to stir that pot. So yeah, absolutely. Don't feel embarrassed to reach out reach out. I had a guy sent me a picture the other day. Actually, it wasn't a picture. It was, we'd put up a Facebook post with one of my tips about the thermal scanners. You all know how much I love my little FLIR camera. And he sent in a picture of an XR6 he'd been installing, and they didn't have the right size cable, and nobody had been in there checking the connections. And when he took when he looked at it, he goes, this wire looks a little crispy. And he grabbed his thermal camera, and white hot. Like it was pretty Now, I don't know what gradient he was using on the camera, but it was way hotter than the rest of the room. So yeah, those are the kind of things that you get used to doing as you've done it a lot. Dan makes a good point. Spare kit purchase depends on parts availability. Some things are a little harder to get, or a little more prone to again, either whether they fail often or whether it's something you can get. Used to be, I mean, anybody who's worked within Energyonics knows that you could go to AutoZone and get most of what you needed to rebuild that transmitter. That's not so much the case anymore.
No, there's no more Energyonics.
Well, obviously, but even now, the newer transmitters, I mean, you know, they're a lot more powerful. They do a lot more stuff. They're a lot more configurable, but they're not quite as simple as they used to be either. You can't just go to AutoZone and grab a motherboard for a single board computer.
You might also just take account of all the cargo ships that are stacked up out in LA Harbor right now.
Mm-hmm.
So with best intentions, the just-in-time model, which is behind all of this, is broken.
This is a paper that I've been discussing for somebody, and I forget where. Oh, I remember where it came up, and you may see it at a conference near you at some time soon. Well, not near you, Lark, because it won't be in the West. But when just in time becomes not quite in time. Because, yeah, I mean, right now, as an example, the company that builds roughly 90% of the analog to digital converter ICs used worldwide burned down last year. Obviously, they're going to rebuild it, but as they're rebuilding it, I mean, if you go, I had somebody call me from Louisville the other day and said, if you go from Louisville to Lexington, every empty parking lot you see is filled with GMC pickup trucks waiting for one chip for the receiver, for the radio. You know, and that's happening all over. You're right. It doesn't take much to throw a wrench into things. So sometimes the shelf spares is the difference between being on the air right now and not. I mean, we're quoting transmitter deliveries in months now instead of weeks, you know, and we're not alone. It's not something that's unique to us by any stretch. So yeah. Do the transmitters have a planned obsolescence plan? Assuming you mean what I think you mean, David, the answer is yes. Typically, for any part that we use, number one, we try to source a spare when we source the original part. The problem is, of course, usually by the time you need to replace the original because it went obsolete, the spare's already gone obsolete. So it's very much a moving target. But we will always get a notification from our suppliers whenever a part goes end of life. And it happens almost daily. I mean, we've got people in purchasing who that is their only job, is sourcing replacement suppliers or replacement components. We've got a whole team in engineering whose only job is figuring out what's compatible. And yeah, it's very much an ongoing challenge. Some manufacturers handle it a little better than others. We all get caught by surprise sometimes, though. I mean, and again, like this factory in Japan burning down. I mean, that wouldn't have been so bad, except about a month later, one in China burnt, and now you've got a double whammy going on because they were the alternate source for a lot of material. You know, if I was a little bit of a conspiracy theorist, I'd think that something was going on there, but you never know. Anyway,
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
What I was asking also is, nowadays, when you're designing transmitters, do you plan that they have a finite life of, let's say, 5 years, 10 years? Because
Oh, yeah.
What is the average life of a transmitter now that you guys are planning on? Because I know when I first started, I was working on transmitters that were 30 and 40 years old.
And even
So-
then, they would have had a projected lifespan. Now, like we design for the assumption of a 15-year minimum lifespan. I mean, that's what we plan to design and be able to get parts for and find these substitutes, et cetera, and so on. But we also realize that it's really rare to see anybody replacing a box that's only 15 years old, which, I mean, not a lot of us driving 15-year-old cars, but that's moving parts. And anyway, so yeah, it very much, we shoot for, again, a minimum of 15 years and an assumption that it'll be closer to 25. And beyond that, we'll keep them going anyway. I mean, because that's what we do. We're still supporting the MFET stuff we built in the 80s. And as far as I know, now some of it, like those modulator drawers and those things, you can still buy a brand new one from us. I wouldn't, because at that point you buy two of those, you've replaced the price of a 5 kilowatt transmitter. You could almost replace the transmitter, but you can. Having said that, we do still keep replace or exchange stock. We do still do in-house repairs. There are folks like Mike Patton has done a great little modification assembly for the electrolytic caps in the ND series transmitters. So, there are definitely options out there to keep the old stuff going. But yeah, we design spec is 15 years because that's what most of the military customers require.
So a lot of the Collins, Rockwell Collins, Continental, the 831Gs and 816R. A lot of those still out.
Got a customer with a 20V still on air full time.
And you have an MFET 50 out there.
Oh, more than one. And I mean, the MFET 50, those were only first developed in 84, 85. So they're in radio years still young. But like the P400s that we started building in 73, some of those are still in service. Yeah, it's not uncommon for that to happen. But again, that's more the exception than the rule. The design plan is like, again, we assume you're going to run it for about 20. I'm going to quantify that and do a little expectation management right off the bat, because if you're running HD with an importer exporter, those things are computers. And again, I don't care whether you're buying ours or somebody else's, and they'll say, oh, we're embedded, and yeah, the Nautel's it's all computers. They're computers. I don't care who makes it or what they call it. It's a computer. And you're not going to buy one of those, that same model, in 15 years. You're just not. So those I would try to shoot for a little sooner replacement life cycle. I don't know what exactly. I mean, and Chris and I had this conversation pretty recently because we're seeing some of the older ones dropping, like, it happens. But for me, I would probably put HD gear and automation system in the same basic time frame. How long do you run an automation computer? I can't answer that. I don't build one. So, what's the answer? What's your budget on automation gear?
And at what point does the power supply in your computer go away?
Well, that's it. So those are the sort of things that more and more we have to start making part of the engineering process, and that we never really, I mean, before, you just sort of looked at it and it's like, well, we got a main, we got an aux, and when we can't fix the main or we can't fix the aux, the main will become the aux and we'll get a new one. And it could be 20 years, could be 30 years, could be 40 years, who knows? But I think more and more we almost have to start scheduling the obsolescence. And like I say, I'm not advocating a 15-year life cycle on a broadcast transmitter. I mean, that's I think even in my mind that's kind of ridiculous. Don't get me wrong, I love to sell y'all a new transmitter every 15. Well, if you buy one today, I won't be around in 15. I won't be working in 15 to sell you the next one. But yeah, I mean, I would say 20 years would be a reasonable target for a transmitter, and 5 to 10 for HD gear. Automation computers, again, I can't speak to that. I mean, I don't know, and it's going to vary. If I'm running the HD gear out at the transmitter site where it's hotter, I might put more toward 5 years. If I'm got it in the studio or my site's air conditioned, I might go more toward 10 years. It'll vary, but definitely that's something that you need to think about, because the that sort of stuff, again, it's a computer. It's not going to last 20 years. And if it does, I'd be willing to bet. I think that some of the first NEI box we built, which should be 15, 16 years old now, I'm thinking that there's probably some parts of those we can't get.
I think it's worth mentioning.
Going to say Chris is nodding his head, so I'm thinking somebody already told me couldn't get one of those fixed. Yeah, Lark, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that, yeah, I was with Continental in the 80s and a design engineer on the 816 series. But, you know, there are so many things that are outside of engineering. For example, you may design it a certain way, and there may be practices. And Continental, for example, they manufactured a lot of their components in-house. But as the markets change, as new owners buy the company, there are financial decisions made, so that a good example would be is, let's say they always stocked a certain transformer, whether they built it or bought it, and somebody bought the last one. The front office looks at it and says, well, we only sold this many per year. The fact that we just sold them all this year, but you average it out, and so we're not going to buy anymore. So you know, you can say that there's an engineering aspect of the obsolescence. There's a financial side. And of course, we all know this, but it really boils down to risk management. So you've got to just take the risk management side of this. I mean, you have very well-intentioned design engineers and even, you know, parts buyers. But if management comes in and says, no, we're not going to, that's not where we're going to put our money. Then you're, you know, everybody meant well. And everybody tried to do the right thing, but it happens.
Ultimately, and I mean, we all love what we do and we love the industry, and that's awesome, but it is still a business. And yeah, I mean, one of our guys said once, he goes, I was whining about lightning protection and something that we had that I thought was a little sensitive. And I think in retrospect, it probably was. I mean, they did some changes. But one of the design guys said, look, he said, I can make a transmitter that'll never fail, but nobody would ever pay for it. So, you know, that's absolutely, those judgment calls are made on not just every transmitter, but they're made a million times in the transmitter. I mean, we'll do 2 years of meetings on project scope, just figuring out exactly how many features we want to put in a transmitter, because every feature is somebody's time, you know, and the man hours are probably the biggest expense when it comes to building a new box. And you would have seen the same thing. I mean, designing a transmitter is easy, but taking the time to do it so it doesn't blow up, that's a bigger challenge.
Software and operating system obsolescence is also something to consider. And I don't know if I missed anything coming in late, but is there an update on the flash replacement?
As soon as you said software, I said, I know where this is going. And that's a really, really good point. And that's another example of the man hours. I mean, we have hired, I don't know how many people, but of course that's all training time. So it'll be a year or two before they're up to full speed. As it stands right now, I was asking Matt about this exact thing 2 or 3 days ago, and he was reasonably confident that he had the alpha version working. Let's see, I am going to see if I can open a browser. If I can get this browser to work, I'll do a screen share, but I need to know that I can, number one, find his IP address.
Is this HTML5?
Yes.
I've run across a few stations that have contacted me, and they can't access their Nautel. And the problem is not so much the new software, it's the fact that the firmware hasn't been updated on their transmitter.
Right. And So that's part of it. The app that we've got in for replacement works and works well, but there are a couple of iterations of that. And if somebody hasn't updated that, then that can be an issue. I'm just taking a look. Matt may not have his transmitter online. We've got one running the HTML5 AUI. I was just going to see if I could get into it. That may be something we'll have to bring him back for, because anyway, so long story short, the alpha version, as I understand it, is working right now, and they're hoping to have beta in a month or month and a bit, but don't quote me on that. I've seen this going on long enough. It's like I said, I'm not quoting anybody delivery on this stuff until I see it actually working, because my credibility is already jeopardized enough. It wouldn't surprise me if it rolls into 2022 for a lot of this stuff. So, you know, we've got the app and it does work, and that's great. It's not ideal because it's not the solution, but they are working on it. And I don't know, let's see, any more updates for the legacy app coming soon? Only real update that we've been asked for on that, Richard, is the ability to add domain names as opposed to IP addresses. So that one, again, with the, I don't want any more updates. Good, because we don't want to do any more updates to it. We would much rather prefer to focus on getting the real thing done. So, and that's where I was going. I don't think that the long-term plan is to do that. I think the plan is to focus more on getting the actual AUI replacement finished. And from what I'm seeing, we're close enough that I'm willing to tell you, I hope a month to 2. Will we see it working at NAB in a releasable beta? I would hope so. I know Matt's hoping so. Would I bet my paycheck on it? No, I still got a family to feed.
Yeah, the bet is whether you get it out before I retire.
Yeah. Well, and you're what, 4 months, right, John?
Yeah.
4 months, I think it's safe to say that we'll have the VS beta. Beyond that, it shouldn't be too long after that for the NV Lite, because it uses an ARM processor, same as the VS does. After that, you get into the single board computer systems that the GV and the NX and the older NV use. So they'll follow along after that. And the code and the middleware is pretty much the same. It's just the actual, like the AUI layer, once that's done, it's done. It's going to be the same all across the board. A few hooks for AM versus FM, but that's about it. The middleware is very much similar, but there are, again, between the ARM-based and the single board computer-based, there are some differences. And then the foundation layer is quite different. I think that the foundation layer for the GV and the NX and the NV is pretty close to done. So I'd like to say it'll all be done this year. I really don't think it will. I think some of it's going to roll over to early next year. But if we have an April 2022 NAB, I'd like to be able to see everybody there and say, yeah, yay, done, finally. Thank
April
God.
1st, right?
What's that?
It'll be released April 1st.
No, I would hope not. But let's see. So you're retiring end of the year, end of November?
End of the year.
End of the year. Okay, well, I'll give you VS beta by then, and hopefully NV Lite and maybe GV.
I have my VS 2.5 spare sitting in the storeroom, ready to be tested.
Did you sign up and get on the list for the VS beta?
Oh yes, I've been on it.
Okay, cool. And I've been telling Matt that he needs to really send out a progress report to his beta list just to let them know. But yeah, no, I've actually say if I find the IP address and he has the transmitter up, then I can go in and play in the transmitter in his basement and turn it on and off and terrify his wife. Because as you know, a VS300 is not a quiet transmitter. But they do it does seem to be working pretty well from what I've seen. They had some connectivity issues. And as you know, the Flash one had some connectivity issues. So that was really critical to get that resolved before they went alpha. And I think that's been done. So that was, I think, the last big hurdle. I hope that was the last big hurdle. Well, Barry, you're taking notes, right? You're going to see if you can con Matt into coming down online and putting his reputation on the line here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
that's one
good.
of them.
'Cause
Jeff,
I'd much rather, yeah.
Oh, Jeff, backing up a little bit, you were talking about in the planning for a transmitter site. Do you
Yeah.
find that you're dealing more these days with people who are not engineers and not so technical? Kind of sounded a little bit like that from some of the comments you were making, like GMs that have no clue and couldn't tell a flange from a wall plug.
So the best way to put it, and I would hazard a guess now that, well, okay, let's back up the bus. When I started doing this a million years ago in 1990, on average, 95% of our calls were people that had a pretty good engineering background, and they might not be really familiar with our box specifically, but I could tell them on a PA or check a PA or grab a voltmeter and measure the volts, and they knew what they were doing. There were the 5% where some DJ, you know, they had a failure and the program director said, call Nautel, see if they can get you going. The engineer's not available. So you still got those. Now I would guess that it is closer to half and half. 50% of the people calling us have got no engineering training whatsoever. Of the remaining 50%, 40% of those, or 50% of those, so about 3/4 in whole, but half of them are IT oriented with very little RF. And when you get messing around in a high power AM transmitter, you really want to tiptoe. And it's a problem because, like, I'll have folks, and I've some of the people on this list have mentioned it to me. One or two others who I've got a lot of respect for as engineers will call me and say, your service folks talk to me like I'm stupid. And the reason is because 3/4 of the people they talk to, stupid is the wrong word, but engineering is not their first line of business. So they're going to be super careful not to give you any instructions that'll blow up the gear or blow you up. Maybe I should have put that in a different order, but guess you know where my priorities lay. But yeah, I mean, it's very much changed. I won't say it's totally reversed from 30 years ago, but it's a huge shift. We see much fewer skilled engineers working on transmitters these days, and that's kind of frightening. It's why I do so many safety courses and don't touch this courses.
Keep one hand in your pocket.
Take your rings off and don't wear the metal watch band. That you can tell I've moved into sales because I've gone a whole non-safety conscious, although I still do have my shock resistant footwear up there.
Jeff, you've probably saved a few lives. Just look at it that way.
Knock on wood. I had one guy one day, a bunch of years ago, we were working on a 50 kilowatt, and he had to get in and pull an exciter drawer, and I said, kill the breakers on the wall. Oh, yeah. And I said, all the breakers on the wall. Yeah. No. There's 2 big power supplies and an exciter supply. Kill them all. Oh, yeah, no, got them all. Okay. So he grabs the exciter, and the next thing I hear is a yelp and a clatter as the phone hits the floor. Because the 120 volts for the exciter was right where his fingers went when he went to lift it out of the drawer. So, yeah. I'd like to think that, I don't know if I've saved any specifically, but I hopefully kept a few people from burning themselves here and there.
Well,
Well, a friend,
go ahead.
oh, I was going to say a friend of mine here in Omaha used to work for McMartin years ago as a support person. And there's nothing worse that makes your hair stand on the back of your neck than to hear somebody on the other end of that phone scream because they've gotten bit. And
well, and I mean, I had a situation like that where I was walking a guy through troubleshooting an SWR problem on an AM rig, and I said, there's something in the antenna system arcing. I said, there's nothing wrong with this transmitter. We've been through all of it, and besides, it works great in the load. So he says, well, what do I do? And I said, well, you got a dial-up remote and a cell phone. So I said, you know, what I would do, it'd be, let's go out and take a look at the ATU and see if we can see anything arcing. Well, he leans into the ATU, and about the time he leaned into the ATU, the rattlesnake that was nesting under the contactor popped its head up. He screamed and jumped, and I just assumed that he killed himself on the spot. But of course, he kind of backed away in a hurry. So yeah, it was a little while before I got the phone call back that settled my nerves and told me that he didn't fry himself.
After he had changed his shorts, probably.
I imagine. I've had that situation once. We were troubleshooting a 50 kilowatt SWR issue in outside of New Orleans, and got to the last. Of course, we lose the last tower because once you find the problem, you stop. But we popped the door open on the ATU, and the front half of a very angry rattlesnake kind of ledged out at us. The back half was welded around the contactor, and the engineer goes, I'm not touching that. And I looked and says, your transmitter, not, or your transmitter site, not mine. I'm not touching it. He goes, well, what do we do? And so I said, I got an idea. So I said, slam that door shut. So we shut the ATU door. We went back to transmitter, hit on, and it went tick, 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 down, reset, tick, 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 down, reset. And I just sat there hitting reset. And about the 20th time it stayed up. And I said, I think our problem's done. So yeah, then it was just a matter of sweeping the charcoal out of the ATU. But
it was well done, Jeff.
Yeah, well, you know, rattlesnake is one of those things. It's not good, rare.
I'm going to take a moment here, and as before we have folks departing because of the hour, and I know you probably you're another hour ahead of the rest of us there, and you may have to go soon. But I wanted to take just a moment and point out two things. First of all, the one that we did week before last on the EAS boxes, over 265 people have watched that video already, which amazed me. And what I've done here is I've changed the virtual lunch gathering page. If you go to the site, it's under news, and it's over here on the lunch gathering. But now all the topics that we've discussed, we've started to put them in by topics. And so you can come down here and, for instance, see the stream guys that we did 2 weeks ago, or Greg Oganowski talking about the radio DJ program. Come on down here toward maintenance, and we got a bunch of Jeff, obviously. And so there's others here, microphones, satellite issues, the Johnsons, studio design. Well, there's Gordon Carter, and test and monitoring gear, things like that. Transmitter operations. Oh, there's Jeff again.
Oh, look, there's Matt Hurden talking about AUI in September last year. Yeah, it's time for an update.
Yes, it is. Let's see if we can get him. So I just want to invite everybody to find this. There is a thing on YouTube that lets you set up libraries, or it doesn't seem very simple or intuitive, but we're trying to make it easy so you can find the older videos should you want to review some of this.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. One other thing, Tim made the comment about 50% no experience, 25 no RF, and only 25 counted on to have basic or greater RF, which is pretty darned accurate from what our support folks are seeing. And we do report this and keep track. And another note for that is if you've got an IT guy who's starting to take an interest in the RF side, WBA does the Media Technology Institute with their summer clinic. Now they're doing a scaled down version this year because the summer conference is 2 weeks before Madison. Alabama broadcasters do their engineering academy. I know that Minnesota is starting to do some engineering sessions with their annual conference. Michigan, a lot of the states are starting to realize this and get on board with it. So definitely this is something that we all should do, is get involved with our state associations to see what we can do to assist, because, you know, in 10 or 15 years, just about everybody on this call is going to be looking at retiring, and who's going to be running the boat after that, right? So yeah, anything we can do to help educate the younger people and get them to do this job safely is a good thing.
Very good. We'll continue to do that. I hope that we'll have some opportunity, maybe with Matt, maybe with you, but to do some even short form tutorials and things like that that we can put up and make available to everybody.
Yeah, and I'll do a shout out for our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Nautel, the service guys, any calls that they get a lot of, they do a little how-to video. And of course, most of them are for VS because that's the ones we get the most calls on. But there are little how-to videos on like how to delete a preset or how to change this or that or whatever. So yeah, that's a really good idea.
How to set the levels, which you have everything backwards.
How to convince the owner that it's not your job to plunge the toilet.
Well, Jeff, we certainly appreciate your being around, and we'll look forward to your next appearance after you've plunged the toilet or whatever.
Going to say in my house, I do all of the plumbing. So most of the plumbing, maybe more of the electrical than I probably should. Although it's funny, one of the kids my young fella went to high school with is a licensed electrician. So I'll do the work and then call Tyler up for a case of beer. He'll do the proper inspection on it. So knock on wood, we give him the case of beer after he does the inspection.
Or call Mr. Bialik. He's done a lot of plumbing this year.
Yeah, it's one of those things that in this job you end up doing a little bit of whatever it takes, and it makes for it interesting because it's not the same thing every day. But thanks very much, folks.
It's just because in our industry we have to deal with a lot of
a lot of stuff. But
we could probably do an afternoon one day where we list all the so-called aspects of a chief engineer's job, and that could take us an hour or two.
Oh, I think it should be list all the aspects that weren't in the job description that suddenly you're responsible for.
All right, David, you set that up and we'll do that.
I'm going to say, even for me, I have a line item that says other duties as required. So, you know, basically my job description is whatever they decide to ask me to do or whatever I happen to take on. But on that note, I do have to skip. So thank you very much, folks. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, Jeff. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon.
You betcha.